I unexpectedly returned home after 3 months in the hospital. The moment I stepped off the elevator, my neighbor blocked my path, snapped irritably. "Please stop making noise in the middle of the night right now." Stunned, I replied that I had been away for months. His face turned pale as he insisted someone was living inside. Walking up to my door, I inserted my old key, but the lock wouldn't budge at all. Someone had completely replaced it. Thank you so much for watching. It means the world to have you here. Let me know in the comments which city or country you're watching from today. Please note, this story incorporates dramatic elements for entertainment and educational value. While settings and names are created for the narrative, the core lesson is entirely worth sharing. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and nobody knew I was coming. That was by choice. 90 days at Mercy General in Fresno had taught me something about the people who show up when you're sick versus the people who show up when you're back on your feet. I wasn't interested in sorting through either group just yet. I wanted my recliner, my kitchen, my coffee maker that took exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds to brew a full pot. I wanted the particular creak of my hallway floorboards and the way afternoon light came through the west window and painted a long orange stripe across the living room wall at 4 o'clock. I wanted home, just home. The cab dropped me at the front entrance of Crestline Towers at 3:30. I had 2 duffel bags and a plastic bag from the hospital gift shop, with 3 paperback novels I hadn't gotten around to reading. My left knee ached from sitting too long, and the Sacramento air smelled like dry grass and exhaust, which was exactly how I remembered it. 22 years I'd lived in this building. Long enough that the security guard at the front desk, a young man named Marcus, who couldn't have been more than 25, gave me a nod that said he recognized me without being able to place exactly who I was. I took the elevator to the 10th floor. The doors slid open, and Harold Gibbs was standing in the hallway. I was 71 years old, barrel-chested with a white mustache he'd had since I first met him 12 years ago. He'd been a Sacramento police officer for 28 years before his knees gave out, and he still carried himself like a man who expected people to step aside. We'd shared more Sunday afternoon football games and arguments about barbecue technique than I could count. He was the kind of neighbor you trusted with a spare key and didn't worry about it. Right now, though, he wasn't looking at me like a friend. He was looking at me like a problem he hadn't expected. "Daniel." He said my name the way you say it when you're about to deliver bad news and haven't decided how yet. "Harold." I set my bags down. My knee was grateful. "You look like somebody backed into your truck." "How long have you been back?" "About 4 minutes." I nodded toward my apartment door, 10B, halfway down the hall. "Why?" Harold's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice, though there was nobody else in the hallway to hear him. "I need you to talk to whoever's staying in your place, Daniel. Tonight. Because I have asked nicely 3 times, and I am done asking nicely." I looked at him. "Harold, music after midnight. Twice last week there was something being dragged across the floor. Sounded like furniture. My wife hasn't slept through the night in 3 weeks, and Sandra's patience runs about 2 miles shorter than mine. Harold." I said his name again, slower this time. "There's nobody staying in my place." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been in a hospital bed in Fresno since January. There's nobody in that apartment. I didn't ask anyone to stay there. I didn't rent it out. I didn't lend it to anyone." I picked my bags back up. "There is nobody in my home." The color left his face in a way that was uncomfortable to watch. Harold Gibbs had spent nearly 3 decades dealing with situations most people couldn't stomach. I had never in 12 years of living across the hall from him seen him look uncertain. He looked uncertain now. "Daniel," he said carefully, "someone has been living there." My stomach dropped about 6 inches, but I kept my face even. What do you mean living there? I mean living there. Lights on every evening. Someone leaves around 8 in the morning, comes back around 6. I've seen them carry groceries up twice. He paused and something shifted in his expression. I thought you'd made arrangements. You know, because of... He stopped. Because of what? Harold rubbed the back of his neck. He was a man who chose his words carefully only when he was worried about how they'd land. Mrs. Calhoun mentioned something a couple months back. Said she heard your daughter had come by. Said there'd been some kind of change in your situation. He looked at me steadily. I didn't get the details. I figured if you'd wanted me to know, you'd have told me yourself. Emily had come by. I stood with that for a moment. Emily, my 34-year-old daughter, who called me on my birthday and at Christmas, and occasionally in between when she needed something. Emily, who had visited me exactly twice during my 90 days at Mercy General, once at the beginning, once in the middle, both times for less than an hour. Emily had come to my building while I was in the hospital, and she had said something to Mrs. Cal, and apparently not to Harold, which was the detail that snagged in my mind like a splinter. Emily knew Harold and I were close. She'd known since she was a teenager. If she'd had something legitimate to say, Harold would have been the first person she'd have said it to. Instead, Mrs. Calhoun knew something, and Harold didn't. I picked up my bags. Which lock are they using? Harold walked with me to the door of 10B. My welcome mat was still there, navy blue, slightly frayed at the corner, from the time I'd caught it, with the wheel of a hand truck 2 summers ago. The brass numbers on the door were exactly where I'd left them. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked wrong. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my keys. The key went into the lock and stopped. I tried again. Turned it left, then right. Applied a little pressure, the way you do when a lock is being stubborn in cold weather. Nothing. The key wasn't catching. The tumblers weren't moving. Someone had changed the lock. I pulled the key out and held it up in the hallway light, confirming what I already knew. Same key I'd carried for 9 years. Same key I'd used to lock this door behind me on January 3rd, when the cab came to take me to the hospital in Fresno. The lock on my apartment had been changed while I was gone. Behind me, Harold exhaled through his nose, the slow, controlled kind of exhale that meant he was working hard not to say something. I raised my hand and knocked on my own front door. For a moment, nothing. Then footsteps, unhurried, unconcerned, the footsteps of someone who had every reason to believe they belonged where they were. A chain rattled. A deadbolt turned. The door swung open, and a woman in her late 50s stood in my doorway, wearing a cardigan I'd never seen before, holding a paperback novel, looking at me with the polite, puzzled expression of someone who had answered the door expecting a delivery. "Can I help you?" she said. I looked past her shoulder. My kitchen, my bookshelves, my Cleveland Guardians calendar on the wall still on January, because nobody had turned the page. All of it exactly where I'd left it, and all of it completely, utterly wrong. My name is Daniel Mercer," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "This is my apartment." She looked at me the way people look at a stranger who has just said something that doesn't quite compute polite confusion, a slight tilt of the head. The kind of expression that precedes either an apology or a firm request to leave. "I'm sorry," she said. "Daniel Mercer." I kept my voice level. "I've owned this apartment since 2008. I've lived here for 22 years. I held up the key, the one that no longer fit the lock she was standing behind. "I just got back from 3 months in a hospital in Fresno." Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt. Not recognition. something closer to alarm, the specific alarm of a person whose carefully arranged life has just been told it might be built on sand. "I don't understand," she said. "I have a lease." "Ma'am, I don't know what you have, but this is my apartment." Harold stepped up beside me. He didn't say anything, but he was 6'2" and had the kind of posture that filled a doorway, and his presence said everything that needed saying. The woman looked at him, then back at me, then took one step backward into the apartment. "I'm going to need to call someone," she said. "That's fine," I said. "We'll wait." Her name was Christine Lawson. She was 58 years old, recently retired from the Sacramento County School District, where she'd worked as an administrative coordinator for 19 years. She told me all of this in the next 10 minutes while we stood in my living room, her in the armchair by the window, me on the couch I'd owned for 11 years, Harold standing near the door with his arms crossed, and his expression professionally neutral. Christine was not a criminal. I knew that within about 4 minutes of talking to her. She was a woman who had answered an online listing, toured the apartment with a man she believed to be acting on behalf of the owner, signed what she believed to be a legitimate lease, paid $4,800 in first month's rent and security deposit, and moved in 6 weeks ago with 3 suitcases and a tabby cat named Gerald, who was currently watching me from the hallway with deep suspicion. "The man who showed me the apartment," I said carefully. "What did he look like?" Christine described him without hesitation. Late 30s, medium build, dark hair, well-dressed. Very professional, very reassuring. He'd had all the paperwork ready at the first meeting. Lease agreement, move-in checklist, HOA welcome packet. Everything had looked completely legitimate. "Did he give you a name?" Harold asked. "Tom Wallace." She frowned slightly. "He said he was the property manager." Harold looked at me. I looked at the wall. There was no Tom Wallace. There was no property manager named anything close to that. Vera Osgood managed this building, had for 11 years, and she was a 52-year-old woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain who sent passive-aggressive emails about recycling bins. Nobody named Tom Wallace worked for Crestline Towers. I asked Christine if she still had the lease agreement. She did a manila folder on the kitchen counter, organized and tabbed. She handed it to me with both hands, and I could see a faint tremor in her fingers that she was working hard to control. She was frightened. She was trying not to show it. I opened the folder. My name was on every page. Daniel Mercer, property owner. The address was correct. The unit number was correct. The monthly rent figure was reasonable for the Sacramento market. The HOA rules addendum was accurate. I recognized the language because I'd signed the original 6 years ago when the board updated their policies. And on the signature line at the bottom of page 4, in handwriting that looked disturbingly close to mine, was my name. I had never seen this document before in my life. Daniel. Harold's voice was quiet and careful, the way it got when he was managing a situation rather than reacting to one. "I see it," I said. I turned to the back page. A notary stamp, Pacific Coast Notary Services, Sacramento, California. A seal, an official-looking signature, a registration number. Everything that was supposed to be there was there. To anyone who didn't know better, it was completely airtight. I set the folder down on my own coffee table and pressed both hands flat against my knees. Christine watched me. Her voice when she spoke had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Mr. Mercer, I swear to you I had no idea. I checked everything I knew how to check. I looked up the building online. I verified the address. I even drove past twice before I agreed to sign anything." Her throat worked. "I saved for 2 years for this deposit." I looked at her, this woman sitting in my armchair, in my apartment, surrounded by her furniture and her books, and a skeptical tabby cat. And I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "I believe you," I said, and I did. Which meant that somewhere between my hospital bed in Fresno and this moment, someone had built an entirely false transaction on top of my life, convincing a decent woman to hand over her savings for an apartment that was never available to begin with. Harold had already stepped into the hallway and was on his phone, voice low. I caught the words, officers and 10th floor, and yes, right now. I stayed where I was. I looked at my bookshelves, my calendar, my kitchen, with someone else's dish towel folded over the oven handle. Then I looked at Christine Lawson, who was sitting very straight in her chair and blinking too fast the way people do when they are determined not to cry in front of a stranger. "Do you have somewhere you can go tonight?" I asked. "Family, a friend." Her chin came up. "My sister lives in Elk Grove. That might be a good idea," I said quietly. "Just for tonight." She nodded once tightly and reached for her phone. In the hallway, I could already hear the elevator. The officers were on their way up. Officer Grant was younger than I expected. Maybe 32, 33, with close-cropped hair and the careful, measured manner of someone trained to walk into chaotic situations and make them slightly less chaotic. His partner, Lewis, was older by maybe a decade, heavier through the shoulders, and carried a small notebook that he opened without being asked. They introduced themselves at the door and stepped inside without touching anything. Grant looked around the apartment the way experienced officers always do, not dramatically, not obviously, just a steady sweep that cataloged everything in the room before he said a single word. His eyes moved from Christine, who had stayed in the armchair with her hands folded in her lap, and Gerald the cat now pressed against her ankles, to Harold standing near the bookshelf, to me. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "That's me. You're the owner of record for this unit." "I am. 22 years. I've been at Mercy General in Fresno since January 3rd. I came home this afternoon and found my lock changed and Miss Lawson living here." Grant nodded, still calm, still taking everything in. "And Ms. Lawson, you've been renting this unit for approximately 6 weeks. Christine straightened in the chair. 6 weeks and 2 days. I have everything. The lease, the deposit receipt, the utility confirmations. All of it." She reached for the manila folder on the side table and held it out with both hands. Grant took it. He and Lewis moved to the kitchen counter and spread the documents out, going through each page methodically. I watched Grant's expression as he read. Nothing shifted dramatically, but I'd spent enough years around people making careful assessments to notice the moment something caught his attention, a slight pause, a barely perceptible tension around his eyes. "Mr. Mercer," he said without looking up, "is this your signature?" I crossed the room and looked where he was pointing. Page 4. The signature line. The handwriting that looked disturbingly like mine. "No," I said. "It isn't." "You're certain?" "I was under general anesthesia on the date printed on that document. I can give you my surgeon's name, my anesthesiologist's name, and the number of the recovery room I woke up in." Lewis wrote something in his notebook. Grant moved to the notary page. He examined the stamp closely. Pacific Coast Notary Services, the seal, the registration number, printed in small type along the bottom edge. He pulled out his phone and typed something. Waited. Read. His expression didn't change, but he set the folder down with a deliberateness that told me something. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "do you know who prepared these documents?" "I have a strong suspicion," I said, "but I'd rather not say until I have more than a suspicion." He accepted that without pushing. "Do you have documentation placing you in Fresno for the past 90 days?" I pulled out my phone. Discharge paperwork photographed before I left the hospital that morning, billing statements sent to my email. The surgeon's post-operative notes, which his office had sent as a PDF. I handed the phone to Grant and watched him scroll through each item with Lewis reading over his shoulder. Christine spoke from the armchair. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. Officers, I want to be absolutely clear. I paid every dollar of that deposit. I signed what I was told was a legitimate lease. The man who handled the rental told me his name was Tom Wallace and that he managed the property on behalf of the owner. She paused. I have text messages from his number. I have a receipt for the cashier's check I used for the deposit. We'll need copies of all of that, Lewis said. You can have everything I have. Grant looked at me. Mr. Mercer, do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information, social security number, signature samples, property records? The question landed in a place I wasn't ready to examine yet. Property records in California are public. Anyone with internet access and 10 minutes could pull my name and address from the Sacramento County Assessor's database. My signature existed on dozens of documents over the decades. HOA paperwork, utility contracts, the original purchase agreement from 2008. But forging a notarized document required more than a signature. It required someone to physically produce a notary stamp, fill in a registration number, and either bribe or impersonate a licensed notary public. Pacific Coast Notary Services. I didn't recognize the name. Grant's phone search had clearly turned up something. I wanted to know what, but this wasn't the moment to ask. I have some ideas, I said carefully. I'd like to look into them before I say anything specific. Grant closed the folder and straightened up. He looked at Christine, then at me, with the particular expression of a man who has just confirmed that a situation is significantly more complicated than the original call suggested. Here's where we are, he said. Mr. Mercer, your identification and documentation place you in Fresno for the duration of the alleged lease period. Ms. Lawson, your documentation shows a transaction that appears on its face to have been conducted legitimately. He paused. What we have here is a civil dispute layered on top of what may be a criminal matter. I can't resolve that tonight. My chest tightened. What does that mean practically? It means we're going to need both of you to come to the station tomorrow morning and provide formal statements. It means we're going to need to speak with the building management office. And it means... He met my eyes directly. Tonight, Mr. Mercer, I'd strongly recommend you don't stay here. The sentence hit me somewhere between my sternum and my spine. This is my apartment, I said. I understand that, sir. His voice was not unkind. And I believe you. But until we can establish the chain of documentation formally, if anything goes missing from this unit tonight, anything at all, it becomes your word against Miss Lawson's. I don't want that for either of you. Harold put a hand briefly on my shoulder. I didn't shake it off. I looked at my living room one more time. My recliner. My bookshelves. The Cleveland Guardian's calendar nobody had turned since January. All of it exactly where I left it. None of it mine to touch tonight. All right, I said. It was the hardest 2 words I'd spoken in 90 days. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. I stood with my 2 duffel bags and the plastic bag from the hospital gift shop and watched the floor numbers count backward, 1098, and thought about the fact that I had just been asked to leave my own home by a police officer who believed me. That was the part I kept turning over. Grant believed me. He'd said so more or less directly, and he'd still asked me to go. Harold rode down with me without being asked. He didn't say anything until we reached the lobby, and then he said, "My couch pulls out." "I'll get a hotel," I said. Daniel. I need to think, Harold. I can't think on your couch with Sandra asking me every 20 minutes if I want decaf. He almost smiled. She would do that. I know she would. I called a cab from the lobby. Harold waited with me, arms crossed, watching the entrance with the particular vigilance of a man who spent 28 years being paid to watch entrances. When the cab pulled up, he held the door and looked at me steadily. "You know something," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know enough to be careful about what I say before I know more." He nodded slowly. "Emily came by in January, week after you went in." My hand tightened on the doorframe. "What did she do?" "Went to the management office. Spent about 40 minutes in there with Vera." He paused. "I saw her leaving. She didn't come by to say hello." I let that settle. "No," I said. "She wouldn't." I checked into the Budget Inn on Exposition Boulevard. Room 114. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. The air conditioner rattled when it cycled on, and the mattress had the particular resistance of something that had absorbed too many years of strangers. I sat on the edge of it with my jacket still on and stared at the wall. My phone rang at 9:47. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the area code. "Sacramento," I answered. "Mr. Mercer," Officer Grant's voice. "I'm sorry to call this late. We've been in contact with your daughter." Everything in my chest went very still. "Emily." "Yes, sir, Ms. Emily Mercer. She's listed as your emergency contact in the building's tenant records." A pause. "Mr. Mercer, your daughter has informed us that she filed a petition for conservatorship with the Sacramento Superior Court approximately 6 weeks ago." I heard the words. I understood them individually. I let several seconds pass before I trusted myself to respond. "On what grounds?" My voice came out flat and even, which took effort. "Cognitive decline," Grant said carefully. She provided documentation from a licensed clinical psychologist, indicating that you have displayed significant memory impairment over the past year, Mr. Mercer. I want to be straightforward with you. This doesn't change our investigation, but it does complicate the picture. I pressed my free hand flat against my knee to stop it from shaking. "That petition hasn't been approved." "No, sir, it hasn't. A conservatorship in California requires a court hearing, a judge's review, and a court-appointed attorney for the subject. None of that has happened yet." Another pause. "But the petition does exist, and your daughter has submitted it as context for tonight's situation." Context. That was one word for it. Emily had planned this, not in the frantic, improvised way of someone reacting to circumstances, in the deliberate, layered way of someone who had thought 3 moves ahead. The conservatorship petition wasn't meant to succeed immediately. It was meant to exist, to create doubt, to give anyone who questioned her actions a paper trail that said her father was confused, unreliable, not to be fully trusted when he made claims about his own property. I thought about how long it would take to arrange something like that. Weeks at minimum, possibly months. She had started planning this before I went into the hospital. "Mr. Mercer," Grant's voice again. "Are you still there?" "I'm here." I stood up from the bed and walked to the window. The parking lot below was half empty, lit orange by sodium lamps. A couple walked past holding paper bags from somewhere. Ordinary Tuesday night in Sacramento. "Officer Grant, I want you to know something. I am 68 years old. I spent 90 days in a hospital. My memory is fine. My cognition is fine. I can give you the name of every attending physician who treated me, every medication I was prescribed, and the date of every blood draw." I paused. "And I am going to prove all of that." A brief silence on the line. Then Grant said quietly, "I'll need you at the station tomorrow morning at 9. Bring everything you've got. I'll be there at 8:45. I hung up, sat back down on the edge of the bed, looked at my hands. 68 years old. 35 years fixing other people's burst pipes and broken fixtures and electrical panels that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. I had rebuilt a bathroom from studs to tile in a weekend. I had raised a daughter alone after her mother died. I had done every hard thing my life had asked me to do without once questioning whether I was capable of it. I was not losing my mind, but somewhere across this city, my daughter was telling people that I was, and she had the paperwork to make them wonder. I reached into the plastic bag from the hospital gift shop and pulled out one of the paperback novels I hadn't gotten around to reading. Opened it to page 1. Read the same first paragraph 4 times without absorbing a single word. Then I put it down, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the air conditioner rattle. I did not sleep. The air conditioner clicked off at 5:43 in the morning, and the silence it left behind was worse than the noise. I had been awake since 2. Not restless, not tossing, just awake, lying flat on my back in the dark with my eyes open and my hands folded on my chest, like a man practicing for something I wasn't ready to think about. At some point, I had started making a list in my head, not of what had been taken from me, of what I knew for certain. I knew the date I went into Mercy General, January 3rd. I knew the name of my surgeon, Dr. Patricia Oakes, thoracic, 22 years in practice. I knew the number of the recovery room I woke up in after the procedure, room 14, second floor, east wing. I knew that on the morning of January 7th, Emily had visited me for 55 minutes, asked 3 questions about the prognosis, and left without saying goodbye to the nurse who had been exceptionally kind to me for 4 days. I knew all of this. Every detail sharp and clean the way only real memories stay sharp. At 6:15, I got up, showered in a bathroom that smelled like generic soap, put on the same clothes I'd traveled in, because I hadn't thought to pack for an extended stay, and sat at the small desk by the window with the notepad the hotel provided. I wrote down every name, every date, every room number, every medication. 2 pages, front and back, small handwriting. Then I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. At 6:45, I called Ray Dunbar. Ray and I had met 23 years ago at a neighborhood association meeting. Neither of us had wanted to attend. He was 64 now, a civil attorney with 30 years of practice behind him, an office on J Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse, and a handshake that made younger lawyers nervous. He was also the only person outside a hospital room who had called me every single week for 90 days to ask how I was doing and actually wait for the answer. He picked up on the second ring. "Daniel." His voice was alert immediately, no sleep-fogged edges. "What's wrong?" "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not a friend right now. A lawyer." A beat of silence. Then, "I'll be there in 45 minutes. What's the address?" I gave him the name of the hotel. He didn't ask any other questions. That was one of the things I had always valued about Ray Dunbar. He understood that some situations required presence before they required explanation. He arrived in 43 minutes, which was typical. He was a compact man with gray hair cropped close at the sides and the particular posture of someone who had spent 3 decades standing up in courtrooms. He set his briefcase on the small desk, sat in the chair across from me, and said, "Tell me everything. Don't edit." I told him everything. I didn't edit. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, but organizing. I recognized the difference. Ray went quiet the way a carpenter goes quiet before he makes a cut. Precision, not hesitation. The conservatorship petition, he said finally. Emily filed it 6 weeks ago. That's what Grant told me. Then it hasn't been heard. He leaned forward slightly. Daniel, a conservatorship in California, what they used to call a guardianship, cannot be granted without a formal hearing before a probate judge. The subject of the petition, meaning you, is entitled by law to your own court-appointed attorney. The process takes months under normal circumstances. He paused. What Emily filed is a piece of paper. It has no legal authority over you, your property, or your decisions. Not yet. Not without a judge's signature. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched. The psychological assessment, I said. She submitted one, signed by a licensed clinician. Ray's expression shifted, not surprised, but sharpened. Do you know who signed it? Grant didn't give me a name. I'll find out. He opened his briefcase and took out a legal pad. Now, the notary, Pacific Coast Notary Services. You know them. I know of them. He wrote the name down. There was a complaint filed with the California Secretary of State's office 8 months ago. Fraudulent notarization on a property transfer in Rancho Cordova. The investigation is ongoing, which means their stamp is legally compromised. Any document they notarized during the investigation period is subject to challenge. He looked up. Every document Christine Lawson was given bears that stamp. The weight of that landed slowly. Every single page of the lease, the signature verification, the property transfer authorization, all of it notarized by a company whose legitimacy was already under legal scrutiny. That's not an accident, I said. No, pas du tout. Ray agreed. It isn't. Someone knew Pacific Coast was operating in a gray area and used them specifically because a compromised notary is harder to prosecute than a fraudulent one. He set his pen down. Daniel, whoever arranged this, understood the system well enough to find its weak points. This wasn't opportunistic. This was researched. I looked at the 2 pages of notes folded in my jacket pocket. How do we prove it? Ray picked up his pen again. We start with the building's security footage. Even if the local system has been overwritten, most commercial security contracts in California include cloud archiving for liability purposes. He wrote as he spoke, steady and methodical. I can file a civil subpoena for Sentinel Shield's archived data within 24 hours. If anyone entered that building and accessed your unit in the past 6 months, we'll find the record. He closed the legal pad and looked at me directly. Daniel, I need you to understand something. What was done to you was not spontaneous. It required time planning and access to information that very few people had. He paused. The number of people who knew you would be gone for 3 months, knew your building, knew your unit number, and had reason to act is not a long list. I held his gaze. No, I said. It isn't. Ray picked up his briefcase and stood. I'll have the subpoena drafted by this afternoon. You have a 9 o'clock at the station. 8:45, I said. He almost smiled. Of course you do. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, the fact that you called me and said you needed a lawyer, not a friend, that's not what someone with cognitive decline does, Daniel. He left. I sat at the small desk and looked at the 2 pages of notes in my hand. Then I picked up the hotel pen and started a 3rd page. Officer Grant was already at his desk when I arrived at 8:42. He looked like a man who had also not slept particularly well, which made 2 of us. He shook my hand, poured me a cup of coffee, without asking, and led me to a small conference room, where my formal statement took just under an hour. I laid out everything in the order it had happened, starting with the cab dropping me at Crestline Towers, and ending with Ray Dunbar sitting across from me at the Budget Inn with a legal pad and a pen. Grant recorded it, typed notes, and asked clarifying questions that told me he had been doing his own thinking overnight. At one point, he looked up from his keyboard and said, "The psychological assessment Emily submitted. The clinician who signed it, do you know a Dr. Warren Phelps?" I turned the name over. "No. He's licensed. Clean record. Practice in Roseville." Grant chose his next words carefully. "He submitted a written statement last night, clarifying that his assessment was conducted via a recorded video session, not an in-person evaluation. He says he was provided the recording by Ms. Mercer and asked to review it for signs of cognitive impairment." Something cold moved through me. A recording of what? He didn't specify, but he's now requested to review his original findings. Grant met my eyes. "Mr. Mercer, I think someone showed that doctor a very carefully selected piece of video. I thought about every phone call I'd made from that hospital bed, every Sunday video call with Emily when I was exhausted and medicated and trying to hold a conversation through the fog of post-surgical fatigue. I thought about how I must have looked, how I must have sounded." I pressed both hands flat on the table. "Is Dr. Phelps cooperating?" "Fully," Grant said. "As of this morning. By 10:15, I was standing on the sidewalk outside Crestline Towers with Ray. Beside me, both of us looking up at the building I had lived in for 22 years, as though approaching it required a plan. Which this morning it did. Vera Osgood's office was on the ground floor behind the mailroom. The door was open. She was at her desk with reading glasses on a beaded chain and 3 stacks of manila folders arranged with the precision of someone who used organization as a defense against chaos. She was 52, efficient, and looked up when we appeared in her doorway with the expression of a woman who had already had a long morning and correctly anticipated that it was about to get longer. "Mr. Mercer," she said. She glanced at Ray. "And you are Raymond Dunbar. I'm Mr. Mercer's attorney." Ray set a business card on her desk with 2 fingers. "We'd like to discuss the security footage for this building." Vera took off her glasses and set them on top of the nearest folder stack. "I spoke with the police last night." "We know," Ray said pleasantly. "We'd like to speak with you directly." She looked at me for a moment, not unkindly. There was something in her expression that I hadn't expected. Not guilt exactly. Closer to the particular discomfort of someone who has realized after the fact that they were used. "The system stores 14 days locally," she said. "I told the officer the same thing. Anything before that has been overwritten." "I understand," Ray said. "We're not asking for the local footage. We're asking for the name of your contracted security provider." Vera's hands stilled on her desk. "Ms. Osgood," Ray continued, his voice remaining pleasant and entirely immovable. "We're going to obtain that information one way or another. A civil subpoena to the building's HOA board will get us the vendor contract within 72 hours. I'd prefer to save everyone that time." She looked at her folder stacks. Then she opened the center drawer of her desk, took out a business card, and slid it across to Ray without a word. "Sentinel Shield Security, Elk Grove, California." Ray picked it up, glanced at it, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you." Vera looked at me directly then. Her voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Mercer, the woman who came in January, she had all the correct paperwork. She knew the unit number, the HOA bylaws, the name of the previous property manager before me." She paused. "She knew things that someone would only know if they had been here many times." "She had," I said. "She grew up visiting this building." Vera absorbed that. "I processed the transfer in good faith. I want you to know that." "I know you did." I meant it. Vera Osgood had not made this happen. She had simply been in the path of someone who had prepared thoroughly enough to make the impossible look routine. The transfer documents, the ones Emily brought in. Do you still have copies? Everything goes into the HOA file. She pulled a folder from the second stack without hesitating, which told me she had already located it this morning. She set it on the desk between us. I made a second copy last night, after the police called. Ray picked up the folder. I watched his eyes move down the first page, the same careful, unhurried scan he had used on everything this morning. Then he turned to the notary page and stopped. He looked at Vera. Pacific Coast Notary Services. Yes. Her voice was careful. Is that relevant? Very. Ray closed the folder and held it. Ms. Osgood, with your permission, I'd like to take this copy. I'll provide a signed receipt. She nodded once. Take it. Outside on the sidewalk, Ray pulled out his phone and dialed before we had taken 3 steps. I heard him say, subpoena and Sentinel Shield, and as soon as possible, and yes, today. He talked for 4 minutes while I stood looking up at the 10th floor window of my own apartment and thinking about a woman who had grown up visiting this building and had used every detail she remembered to take it from me. Ray ended the call, looked at me. The subpoena will be filed by end of business today. Sentinel Shield will have to respond within 5 business days. 5 days, I said. Standard timeline. He put his phone away. Daniel, whoever did this knew this building the way a resident knows it. They knew the management protocols, the security vendor, the HOA filing process. He paused. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from research. It comes from time. I looked at the entrance of Crestline Towers, the door I had walked through thousands of times. No, I said, it doesn't. The 5 business days felt like 5 weeks. I stayed at the Budget Inn, not because I couldn't afford somewhere better, but because leaving felt like conceding something I wasn't willing to concede. Room 114 had become a kind of headquarters, the small desk covered in notes, the hotel notepad replaced by a legal pad. Ray had dropped off 3 pens lined up because I had developed an irrational fear of running out of ink in the middle of writing something important. Harold brought me dinner twice. He didn't announce he was coming. He just knocked, handed me a container of whatever Sandra had made, and stood in the doorway long enough to confirm I was functional. The second time, he brought a 6-pack of Sacramento's finest gas station beer, which was not fine at all, and we sat in the 2 chairs by the window and watched the parking lot and didn't talk about Emily once. That was the right call. Ray called every morning at 8. His updates were brief and precise. Subpoena served. Sentinel Shield counsel contacted. Response expected Thursday. He did not offer reassurance. Ray Dunbar had been a civil attorney for 30 years and understood that reassurance was a form of lying when the outcome was genuinely uncertain. I appreciated that more than I could have explained. On Thursday morning, Ray picked me up at 8:30. We drove to Sentinel Shield Security's offices in Elk Grove in his car, a sensible gray sedan that smelled like coffee and case files. Linda Cartwright, the operations manager, met us in the lobby. She was mid-40s, direct with the clipped efficiency of someone who spent her days managing systems rather than people. She had the archived footage ready on a monitor in a small conference room before we sat down. Our system is motion-triggered, she said, pulling up the archive interface. Captures anything that moves in the covered areas, lobby, elevator banks, corridor intersections, mailroom. Clips are uploaded to encrypted cloud storage within 90 seconds of capture. Retention period is 180 days for liability purposes. She looked at Ray. Your subpoena specified January through April of this year. Correct, Ray said. Then you'll want to start here. She typed a date. January 7th. The monitor filled with the corridor view, 10th floor, the stretch of hallway outside apartment 10B. The timestamp read 9:41 in the morning. A figure appeared from the elevator. Female, medium height, dark coat, baseball cap pulled low. She walked directly toward the unit, not hesitating, not checking numbers. She knew exactly where she was going. My jaw tightened. Ray put a hand briefly on my forearm. The figure unlocked the door and went inside. 11 minutes later, she came out empty-handed and returned to the elevator. As she waited, she kept her chin down. The cap did its job. Cartwright clicked to a second clip, January 14th. Same figure, same coat. This time accompanied by a man. Taller, broader through the shoulders, dark jacket, a different cap. He carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. They went directly to the management office. "That's the corridor camera," Cartwright said. "We have a second angle from the lobby. Different elevation." She opened a second window on the monitor. The lobby view was wider shot from above the entrance, catching the space at a different angle than the corridor camera. She pulled up January 14th from this feed and advanced it to 9:53. The two figures crossed the lobby toward the management office. At the door, the woman reached past the man to push it open. The motion turned her slightly toward the lobby camera. Just slightly. Just enough. I stopped breathing. It was Emily. Her face, her jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was about to walk into a room, like she had already decided how the conversation would go. 18 months since I had seen her in person, but I would have known that posture from twice the distance. "Daniel," Ray said quietly. "I see her." Cartwright advanced the lobby feed by 4 seconds. The man turned to follow Emily through the door. His cap was angled differently than in the corridor. The lobby camera caught him full across the face for less than 2 seconds before he was through the door. 2 seconds was enough. Travis Holden, 38 years old. He had sat across my dinner table twice. Asked me about the Sacramento real estate market, with what I had taken for polite curiosity. Shook my hand. Thanked me for dinner. I had liked him well enough. That was the part that settled into my chest like something swallowed wrong. I had looked at this man and found nothing alarming. He had been standing in my home and planning to take it, and I had offered him a second helping and asked if he wanted coffee. Ray leaned forward. "Ms. Cartwright, how many separate appearances does the woman in the January 7th clip make over the January through April period?" Cartwright ran the search. 11 visits, 7 times with the male companion, 4 times alone. "And the management office is their interior camera coverage. Lobby side only. We can see entry and exit, not interior activity." Ray nodded slowly. "I'll need copies of all 11 clips. Original resolution unedited, with the metadata intact." "Already prepared." Cartwright slid a sealed USB drive across the table. "Chain of custody documentation is in the envelope." Ray picked it up. He looked at me. I was still looking at the frozen frame on the monitor. Travis Holden's face caught mid-stride expression, unguarded in the way faces go when nobody is supposed to be watching. "Mr. Mercer," Cartwright said, "do you recognize both individuals?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out even. "The woman is my daughter. The man is her fiancé." Cartwright absorbed that without comment. She was a professional. But something moved through her expression, a brief involuntary tightening that told me she was also a human being. Ray stood, collected the envelope and the USB drive, and shook Cartwright's hand. I stood as well. My legs felt steadier than I expected. In the car, Ray set the USB drive on the dashboard between us and looked at it for a moment without starting the engine. 11 visits, he said. 11, I said. He started the car. We drove back toward Sacramento without turning on the radio. Ray's office on J Street was the kind of place that looked disorganized until you realized every stack had a system. He had 3 monitors on his desk, one for case files, one for email, one that he used exclusively for reviewing evidence. The third monitor was where he loaded the USB drive from Sentinel Shield at 11:47 that morning, and where we spent the next 2 hours going through every clip in the archive one by one in the order Linda Cartwright had cataloged them. The lobby footage told one story. The corridor footage told another. But it was the management office entry clip shot from the lobby side camera at an angle that caught the glass panel beside the office door that told us the most. January 14th, Travis Holden and Emily entered Vera Osgood's office at 9:56 in the morning. At 10:04, Vera left. The glass panel caught her moving through the lobby toward the building entrance coffee run, most likely given. She was back at 10:22. 18 minutes. In those 18 minutes, Travis worked. The glass panel reflection was partial and imperfect, but Ray had a colleague with forensic video enhancement experience who owed him a favor. By 2 in the afternoon, we had a cleaned-up version of those 18 minutes on the center monitor. Travis opened the leather portfolio he had carried in. He laid items on Vera's desk with the methodical care of someone who had rehearsed the sequence. A mechanical stamp device, the kind used to emboss paper rather than ink it, leaving a raised impression. A separate ink stamp with a rubber face. A small glass bottle that Ray identified immediately. Stamp pad ink, Ray said. The specific formulation used for notary seals in California. You can buy it online, but the combination of the embosser, the ink stamp, and the registration number on that seal means he either purchased a fraudulent notary kit or had access to someone's legitimate equipment. Pacific Coast Notary Services, I said. Almost certainly. Ray leaned back. Someone at Pacific Coast either sold him their stamp or was paid to produce sealed documents without proper verification. That's a separate criminal matter, and Detective Simmons will want to know about it. He said the name casually, but it was the first time he had used it in my presence. Who is Detective Simmons? Carol Simmons. She handles real estate fraud for Sacramento PD. 12 years in the unit, good reputation, thorough. He glanced at me. I called her this morning while you were getting dressed. She wants to meet this afternoon. I looked at the frozen frame on the monitor. Travis Holden bent over Vera Osgood's desk, working with the focused concentration of a man who knew exactly how much time he had and intended to use all of it. He practiced this, I said. Yes. Ray didn't soften it. The sequence is too clean. No hesitation, no mistakes, no checking instructions. He had done this before or rehearsed it until it felt like routine, that landed somewhere uncomfortable. Not because it surprised me. I had known since the budget in that this was not improvised. It was uncomfortable because it meant Emily had not simply made a reckless decision in a moment of desperation. She had found a man who knew how to do this. She had chosen him, or he had found her, and together they had built something that was meant to be permanent. Detective Carol Simmons arrived at Ray's office at 3:15. She was 47, lean, with dark hair, cut short, and the particular quality of attention that distinguished genuinely experienced investigators from people who were merely competent. She shook my hand, accepted coffee, and sat down across from the monitor without being invited, which told me she was already treating this as her case. She watched the enhanced footage twice without speaking. Then she said, "How many clips total?" 11 appearances, Ray said. 7 with both subjects, 4 with the female subject alone. The female subject being Emily Mercer. It was not a question. My daughter, I said. Yes. Simmons looked at me with the direct, unvarnished attention of someone who had learned not to manage other people's emotions for them. Mr. Mercer, I want to be straightforward with you. The footage combined with the Pacific Coast connection gives us a strong circumstantial foundation. But to move forward with criminal charges, we need documented financial transactions. She paused. Ms. Lawson paid a deposit. Someone received that money. We need to trace where it went. Ray opened a folder on his desk. I've subpoenaed Christine Lawson's bank records. The cashier's check she used cleared through a business account registered to a property management company called Golden State Rental Solutions, LLC. The company was incorporated in California 11 months ago. He slid a page across to Simmons. The registered agent is Travis Holden. Simmons picked up the page, studied it, set it down. 11 months ago, 3 months before Daniel entered the hospital, Ray said. The room went quiet for a moment in the way rooms go quiet when something has just been confirmed rather than suspected. Travis had not formed that company after Daniel went in for surgery. He had formed it before, which meant the target had been identified, the structure had been built, and all they had needed was the right window of absence. I thought about Emily sitting across my dinner table at Christmas 4 months before I went into the hospital, asking about my health, asking whether I had updated my will. I had thought she was being responsible, thoughtful even. I had been grateful. Mr. Mercer, Simmons's voice pulled me back. I want to discuss next steps, specifically what I'd like you to consider doing. I looked at her steadily. Tell me. Right now, Emily and Travis believe the situation has gone their way. You've been displaced, you're being cast as cognitively impaired, and the apartment is generating income. She folded her hands on the table. I'd like to keep it that way for a little while longer. Ray was watching me. I was watching Simmons. You want to let them keep going, I said. I want to let them get comfortable. She held my gaze. Comfortable people do things that careful people don't. And right now, careful isn't working in their favor anymore. She paused. But it only works if they believe you've given up. I looked at the frozen frame still on the monitor. Travis Holden at Vera's desk, stamp in hand, 18 minutes of careful and practiced fraud. What exactly, I said, would giving up look like? Simmons answered my question the way experienced investigators answer most questions, by asking one of her own first. Mr. Mercer, when you were in the hospital in Fresno, did Emily visit you more than twice? Twice, I said. Once in January, once in February. Did she ask about the apartment either time? I thought back. The January visit, she had sat in the chair beside the bed, asked about the procedure, looked at her phone twice. She had asked about my will. At the time, I had taken it as the kind of practical question adult children asked when a parent was in surgery. Sitting in Ray's office now, it sat differently. She asked about my will, I said. Whether the apartment was in a trust or held outright. Simmons nodded. She needed to know the ownership structure before she could move. If it had been in a revocable trust, the transfer would have been significantly more complicated. She paused. Mr. Mercer, giving up for our purposes means Emily and Travis need to believe you have accepted the situation completely. That you're tired. That the legal process has worn you down. That you are not coming back. How do we make them believe that? We don't fabricate anything, Ray said immediately. No false court documents, nothing that could compromise the prosecution later. He looked at Simmons. What we discussed was a public performance. Daniel is seen. Daniel is heard. Daniel appears to withdraw. Simmons nodded. Before we talk about that, I want you to understand something clearly. She opened a folder and set a single photograph on Ray's desk. Emily and Travis ran this operation on one target. You. Which means every decision. They made the conservatorship. Petition the psychological assessment. The notary fraud was designed specifically around your life, your patterns, your relationships. She paused. This was not opportunistic. You were not randomly selected. Someone who knew you very well identified every vulnerability you had and built a plan around it. I looked at the photograph. It was a still from the Sentinel Shield footage. Emily in the lobby of Crestline Towers, January 7th, chin down, cap pulled low. She knew the building's security vendor, Ray said carefully. She knew the management protocols. She knew which neighbors you were close to and which ones she could inform without risk. He paused. Harold was not told because Harold would have called you immediately. Mrs. Calhoun was told because Mrs. Calhoun would not question a concerned daughter. I had known all of this. I had assembled these pieces over 5 months in hotel rooms and law offices and a diner on Capitol Avenue. Hearing it laid out in sequence in someone else's voice in a room with fluorescent lights and a coffee maker that had been running since 7 in the morning made it land differently than assembling it alone in the dark had. She planned this before I went into the hospital, I said. The LLC was formed 11 months ago, Simmons said. 3 months before your surgery. Yes. I pressed both hands flat on Ray's desk. The wood was cool under my palms. Outside on J Street, a truck rumbled past, rattling the window in its frame, and the ordinary sound of the city going about its business felt very far away from this room and everything in it. What do you need from me? I asked. Simmons leaned forward. I need Emily and Travis to get comfortable. Right now they believe they have won, you have been displaced, you are being cast as cognitively impaired, and the apartment is generating income. I need them to keep believing that. She held my gaze. Which means I need you to perform defeat convincingly enough that Travis makes one more move. One more lease signed, one more deposit collected. That is what makes this airtight. And Emily, I said. Emily goes when Travis goes, within the hour. Simmons folded her hands. But Travis needs to pull the trigger first. He is the one with the LLC, the one with the notary connection, the one whose name is on every financial transaction. If he moves, she moves, and if she moves, it is over. Ray looked at me. The afternoon light through his office window cut across the desk between us, dividing the surface into light and shadow, with the clean precision of a line drawn by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel, he said quietly, are you ready to let them think they've won? I thought about Emily sitting across from me at Cornerstone Coffee. The set of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze, the complete absence of anything resembling regret. Yes, I said. Tell me what that looks like. Before I reveal what happened when I finally confronted my daughter, face-to-face comment, still here down below, so I know you're following along. And please note, the story ahead includes some dramatized details to heighten the suspense, so if you only prefer 100% real-life stories, feel free to turn off the video right now. I sent Emily a text message on a Wednesday morning. 3 sentences. No accusations, no demands. Just, I'd like to see you. Coffee somewhere neutral. I'm not looking for a fight. I stared at it for a long moment before I hit send. Then I put the phone face down on the desk and went to make coffee because staring at the screen would not make her answer faster and would make the next 10 minutes considerably worse. She replied in 4 minutes, which told me she had been waiting. Sure, Dad. Cornerstone Coffee on R Street. Tomorrow at 10. I showed the message to Ray. He read it twice. She picked the location, he said. I know. She wants the home advantage. He handed the phone back. Let her have it. I called Harold that evening. He listened without interrupting, which was becoming a theme. When I finished, he said, You want me there. At the next table, with your phone out. A pause. California's a 2-party consent state, Daniel. If she doesn't know she's being recorded, she'll see the phone, I said. I'm not asking you to hide it. Put it on the table. If she asks, tell her you're waiting for a call. She won't ask. I paused. Emily never paid much attention to Harold Gibbs. Another pause, shorter this time. No, he said. She never did. Cornerstone Coffee was the kind of place that had exposed brick walls and a chalkboard menu and charged $4.50 for a cup of coffee that tasted exactly like every other cup of coffee. I arrived at 9:52. Harold was already there, 2 tables away, phone face up on the table beside his cup, reading glasses, on looking entirely like a 71-year-old man with nothing particular to do on a Thursday morning. Emily walked in at 10:03. I had not seen her in 18 months. She looked well. That was the first thing I noticed, and I noticed it the way you notice a bruise, not with pleasure, just with the involuntary registration of a fact. She was wearing a dark blazer, and her hair was shorter than I remembered. She moved through the coffee shop with the particular confidence of someone who has decided in advance how a conversation will go. She sat down across from me without ordering anything. Dad. She set her bag on the table. You look tired. I've been sleeping in a hotel for 3 weeks, I said. That'll do it. Something flickered across her face, not guilt. Calculation. She was assessing how tired I actually was versus how tired I claimed to be. You could have called me, she said. I would have helped you find somewhere. I looked at her for a moment. 34 years old. I had taught her to ride a bicycle in the parking lot behind the hardware store on Freeport Boulevard. I had sat outside a middle school gymnasium for 4 hours, waiting for her drama club performance to start, because she had asked me to be there early. I had driven 11 hours round trip when her car broke down in Reading because she hadn't wanted to wait for a tow service. Emily, I said, what did you do to my home? She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She reached for the coffee I had ordered for her, took one sip, and set it back down. Dad, I need you to hear me out. I'm listening. She folded her hands on the table. Her voice was composed, practiced the voice of someone who had rehearsed this conversation and was now delivering it. You worked your whole life, 40 years fixing pipes and wiring for people who never once learned your last name. You saved every dollar you had and put it into that apartment. She paused. And you were just going to sit in it, forever, while Travis and I are trying to build something and we're drowning. So you took it. I accessed an asset that was going to be mine eventually anyway. Her voice didn't waver. I needed it now. You didn't. The coffee cup in front of me had gone cold. I hadn't touched it. That apartment is my home, Emily. I built that life. She tilted her head slightly. You built it. I collected it. She said it the way people say things they have convinced themselves are reasonable. That's how inheritance works, Dad. The timing was just different. And Travis's LLC, I said. Golden State Rental Solutions, incorporated 11 months ago. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. A tightening around the eyes that she controlled almost immediately, but not quite fast enough. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. 11 months ago, I said. 3 months before I went into the hospital. I kept my voice low. You needed to know the ownership structure before you moved. That's why you asked about my will in January, in the hospital room, while I was still in a gown. Her jaw tightened. Dad, I want to understand something. I leaned forward slightly. You have my camera footage. You have my medical records from Fresno. You have 41 years of knowing exactly how I live and what I care about. I paused. And you still thought this would work? Her chin came up. It did work. For 5 months it worked perfectly. I know what I saw on camera. I folded my hands on the table, mirroring her. 11 visits Emily, 7 with Travis, 4 alone, January through March. I paused. The silence between us was not empty. It was full of something neither of us could name, and neither of us wanted to. Then Emily straightened in her chair. Her chin came up. The calculation in her eyes settled into something colder. "You should have stayed in Fresno," she said. "Everyone would have been better off." I stood up. I put a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I looked at my daughter one more time at the set of her jaw, and the steadiness of her gaze, and the complete unbroken absence of anything resembling regret. "I know," I said quietly. "That was the plan." At the next table, Harold's phone screen glowed red. Harold was waiting on the sidewalk outside Cornerstone Coffee when I came through the door. He had his phone in his hand, and his jacket collar turned up against the May wind coming off the river. He looked at me the way he had looked at situations his entire career, assessing, not reacting. I had always appreciated that about Harold Gibbs. He had spent 28 years as a police officer and had learned the hard way that reacting and responding were not the same thing. "You all right?" he said. I thought about it honestly. "No, but I'm clear." He nodded. "Good enough." He held up the phone. 41 minutes. Clean audio throughout. She never looked at it once. "I told you she wouldn't." We walked to where he had parked on our street 2 blocks from the coffee shop. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car with the doors closed. Then Harold played back 30 seconds from the middle of the recording, Emily's voice flat and composed. "You built it. I collected it. That's how inheritance works, Dad." The timing was just different. The words sounded worse the second time. Not because they were more cruel, because they were more deliberate. "Ray needs this today," I said. Harold was already dialing. The meeting was set for 4 o'clock that afternoon at Ray's office on J Street. By the time Harold and I arrived at 3:50, the others were already there. Detective Simmons sat at the far end of this conference table with a legal pad and 2 pens. Beside her was a man I had not met before, Roger Ashby, 41, a field investigator from the California Department of Real Estate, who had been brought in specifically because Travis Holden had operated as an unlicensed property manager. He had a quiet, thorough manner and a briefcase that he opened without ceremony the moment introductions were finished. Vera Osgood sat nearest the door. She had come voluntarily, which Ray had told me she would. When I walked in, she met my eyes and gave me a single, small nod. It was the nod of a woman who had spent 3 weeks feeling like a fool and had decided to do something useful about it. Harold sat beside me. Ray stood at the head of the table and called the meeting to order the way he called everything quietly, without drama, with the complete assumption that everyone present would pay attention. "We have 4 categories of evidence," Ray said. He held up one finger. Surveillance footage from Sentinel Shield Security 11 documented visits by Emily Mercer and Travis Holden to Crestline Towers between January and March of this year, including footage of Travis Holden producing fraudulent notary materials in the building management office. A second finger. A third finger. An audio recording obtained this morning of Emily Mercer stating in her own words that she intentionally accessed her father's property without authorization and collected rental income from it. He paused. And fourth, a statement from Dr. Warren Phelps, the clinical psychologist, whose signature appeared on the conservatorship petition, confirming that his assessment was conducted without an in-person evaluation and that he is retracting his original findings. Roger Ashby from the DRE looked up from his briefcase. "Travis Holden has never held a real estate license in the state of California. Not a provisional license, not an expired license. Nothing." He set a printout on the table. Operating as a property manager or rental agent without licensure in California is a criminal offense. Combined with the identity theft, forgery, and elder financial abuse charges, the district attorney will have significant discretion in how they structure the case. Simmons picked up the printout, scanned it, and passed it to Ray. "The audio recording is the piece we needed most," she said. She looked at Harold. "Mr. Gibbs, the phone was visible on the table." "Face up center of the table," Harold said. She walked past it twice on her way to her chair. "Good." Simmons wrote something on her legal pad. "California Penal Code 632 requires all parties to consent to recording a confidential communication. The operative word is confidential. A conversation in a public coffee shop with the recording device in plain view does not meet the legal standard for confidentiality." She set her pen down. "The recording is admissible." Vera Osgood spoke for the first time. "The HOA board met this morning." Her voice was steady. "We voted to immediately suspend building access privileges for both Emily Mercer and Travis Holden pending the outcome of the investigation. Electronic key fob access has been deactivated as of 11 this morning." She folded her hands on the table. "We also voted to retain independent legal counsel to represent the association and the affected residents in any civil proceedings." I looked at Vera. 3 weeks ago, she had been a property manager who processed paperwork and sent emails about recycling bins. She had been used efficiently and without her knowledge by 2 people who had counted on her competence to make their fraud look legitimate. She had not responded to that by becoming defensive. She had responded by becoming useful. "Thank you, Vera," I said. She nodded once. "Don't thank me yet." Ray moved to the second item on his agenda. "The bait." He looked at Simmons. "Carol, do you want to walk everyone through the structure?" Simmons turned her legal pad to a clean page. "Emily and Travis need to believe Daniel has withdrawn, completely and visibly. No legal challenges, no further contact, no presence in the building." She looked at me. "That means you are seen leaving Sacramento. Harold confirms to anyone who asks that you've gone back to the treatment center." She paused. "Meanwhile, Unit 10B goes back on the market. Same platform Travis used before Craigslist Facebook Marketplace. Same price point." "And the renter?" Ray asked. "Already arranged," Simmons said. "Detective Ryan Kowalski, 12 years undercover experience, currently assigned to our financial crimes unit. He will contact Travis through the listing express interest and arrange a meeting." She looked around the table. "We let him follow it all the way to the moment he accepts payment." Ashby from the DRE raised one hand slightly. "At that point, does my office need to be present?" "I'd like a DRE investigator on site," Simmons confirmed. "The unlicensed practice charge needs a witness from your office to carry maximum weight at sentencing." Ray looked at me. Everyone at the table looked at me. 6 people who had each contributed something necessary to reach this point: footage, financial records, testimony, institutional authority, 28 years of police instinct, and 41 minutes of audio recorded in a coffee shop on R Street. "One question," I said. "When it happens, when they walk Travis out, will Emily know?" Simmons held my gaze. "We'll pick her up within the hour." I put both hands flat on the table and pushed back my chair. "Then let's finish it," I said. The performance required 3 things. Ray had laid them out the evening after the meeting, sitting across from me at a corner table at a diner on Capitol Avenue. With 2 cups of coffee neither of us was drinking. First, Daniel needed to be seen leaving, not slipping away seen. By Harold, by Vera, by Mrs. Calhoun, by anyone in Crestline Towers who might mention it to someone who might mention it to Emily. Second, Daniel needed to call Emily directly. Not a text, a voice call, because voices carry things that text cannot. Exhaustion defeat the specific flatness of a man who has stopped fighting. Third, Daniel needed to stay gone long enough for Travis to get comfortable. How long, I had asked. Ray had looked at his coffee. Simmons thinks 72 hours. Long enough for them to believe it. Short enough that they move quickly. He paused. People who are greedy don't wait when they think the coast is clear. I spent the following morning preparing. Not packing. I had been living out of 2 duffel bags for 3 weeks, and there was nothing to pack that wasn't already packed. What I was preparing was something else entirely. I sat at the small desk in room 114 with the hotel notepad, and I wrote out what I intended to say to Emily, word by word, the way I used to write out estimates for large jobs when I was still working. Measure twice, cut once. Get the language right before you open your mouth. I had been a plumber and electrician for 40 years. I knew exactly what defeat sounded like in a man's voice. I had heard it in customers who had put off a repair too long and come home to a flooded kitchen. I had heard it in men my age who had looked at an estimate and realized they could not afford what needed to be done. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and slightly slower than normal, and it came with long pauses that weren't for effect. They were because the person talking had temporarily run out of the energy required to continue. That was what I needed to sound like. I called Emily at 9:47 in the morning. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Dad. Cautious. Waiting. Emily. I let the word sit for 2 full seconds before I continued. I've been thinking about what you said at the coffee shop. A pause on her end. Shorter than I expected. Okay. I talked to Ray. My voice came out slower than my normal pace, which took concentration to maintain. He says the conservatorship petition, if it goes to a full hearing, it could take 8-9 months, maybe longer. Another pause. I don't have that in me right now. I just got out of the hospital. I'm 68 years old, and I'm tired, Emily. I'm tired of fighting. The silence on her end lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Dad. I'm going back to the treatment center, I said. Not Fresno. There's a place in Monterey that Dr. Oakes recommended. Extended recovery program. Could be 3 months, could be longer. I let my voice drop slightly on the last sentence, the way voices drop when people are saying something they haven't fully accepted yet. The apartment, I'm not going to fight you on it. I just need you to know that. 5 seconds of silence. Okay, Dad. Her voice was measured, careful, the voice of someone who had wanted to hear this and was now managing their reaction to it. That's probably for the best. Monterey is beautiful. You'll be comfortable there. She did not ask which facility. She did not ask for a phone number. She did not ask when I was leaving, or whether I needed help with transportation, or whether there was anything she could do. She said, Monterey is beautiful, and she said, you'll be comfortable there. And that was the entirety of what my daughter offered when I told her I was going away for 3 months. Yeah, I said. I think so too. Take care of yourself. A pause. I'll call and check in. She would not call. We both knew that. Okay, I said. Goodbye, Emily. I ended the call. Set the phone face down on the desk. Pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at the wall of room 114 for a long moment. The air conditioner cycled on with its familiar rattle. Outside Sacramento went about its Tuesday morning with complete indifference to the conversation that had just taken place. Then I picked up the phone and called Ray. She took it, I said. How long did it take her? 4 seconds to process. Then she told me Monterey is beautiful. A brief pause on Ray's end. She didn't ask which facility. No. Another pause. All right. His voice was careful. The visible departure is this afternoon. Harold is going to help you load the bags into the truck. I've asked Vera to make sure she's at the front desk when you come through the lobby. Mrs. Calhoun is usually at her mailbox around 2. Harold will time it so you pass her on the way out. And after, check into the Residence Inn on Harbor Boulevard in West Sacramento. Different name than the Budget Inn, different part of the city. You stay there, you wait, you don't contact Emily or Travis under any circumstances. He paused. Simmons thinks Travis will have the listing posted within 24 hours. I looked at the 2 duffel bags sitting by the door of room 114. 3 weeks of living out of luggage in a city where I owned a home 12 minutes away. Ray, I said. Yeah, when this is over. I stopped. Started again. When I go back to that apartment for the last time, I want to do it alone. A long pause. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Ray said, I know. His voice had lost its lawyer's precision for a moment. Just a man talking to a man he had known for 23 years. I'll make sure of it. I hung up, stood, picked up my jacket from the back of the desk chair. At 2:15 that afternoon, I walked through the lobby of Crestline Towers with 2 duffel bags and the plastic bag from the hospital gift shop. And I nodded to Vera behind the front desk, and I stopped to say goodbye to Mrs. Calhoun at the mailboxes, and I shook Harold's hand at the door. Harold held on a second longer than necessary. 72 hours, I said quietly. I'll be here, he said. I put my bags in the truck and drove away without looking back. Travis posted the listing 18 hours after I drove away from Crestline Towers. Simmons texted me a screenshot at 11:43 that night. I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed at the Residence Inn on Harbor Boulevard, still dressed, still awake, and I looked at the listing for a long time before I set the phone down. Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, same as before. Luxury downtown condo, fully furnished, immediate occupancy, $2,600 a month. The photographs were ones I recognized, taken during one of Emily's 11 visits, bright afternoon light through the west window, the same orange stripe across the living room floor that I had been thinking about since January. He had used photographs of my apartment to sell my apartment. I texted Simmons back, saw it. She replied, clock starts now. The 72 hours I had agreed to wait were already down to 54. Detective Ryan Kowalski contacted Travis through the Craigslist, listing the following morning, using a phone registered to a cover identity. A software engineer named David Pierce recently relocated to Sacramento from Portland, looking for furnished housing while his permanent apartment was being renovated. Travis responded within 40 minutes. They exchanged 4 messages, then moved to a phone call. Kowalski called me from a second phone afterward and read me the transcript from memory, which told me he had been doing this long enough to retain conversations verbatim. Travis had been smooth, relaxed. He had answered every question about the unit with the easy familiarity of someone who had been inside it many times, which of course he had. He described the kitchen layout, the closet space in the guest bedroom, the view from the west window. He mentioned that the owner was an older gentleman who had relocated for health reasons and preferred a reliable long-term tenant. The owner was an older gentleman. That was how he described me. They arranged to meet at the apartment the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, Thursday morning. I was at Ray's office at 8. Simmons arrived at 8:15 with Kowalski, who I met in person for the first time. He was 44 solid through the chest and shoulders, with an unhurried manner that I recognized immediately. It was the manner of someone who had spent years in situations where appearing unhurried was the difference between a successful outcome and a dangerous one. He shook my hand and said, "Mr. Mercer, I've read your file. I want you to know we're going to do this right. I believed him. Simmons walked us through the final sequence. Kowalski would arrive at Crestline Towers at 1:55, meet Travis in the lobby, and be shown the apartment. Inside the unit, Kowalski would review the lease documents. Travis produced. Raise minor questions about the terms. Standard tenant behavior, nothing to raise suspicion, and then agree to proceed. The payment would be a cashier's check made out to Golden State Rental Solutions in the amount of $5,200, representing first month's rent and security deposit. When Travis accepted the check, it was over. Roger Ashby from the DRE would be in the building management office with Vera Osgood. Harold would be in the lobby ostensibly collecting his mail. Two uniformed officers would be positioned at the stairwell exit and the elevator bank. Simmons would be inside apartment 10B with me. With you, I had said when she told me. I had. It's your apartment, Mr. Mercer, she said. You have every legal right to be present. And frankly, she paused, I think you've earned it. We arrived at Crestline Towers at 1:30. Vera let us in through the service entrance. The lobby was quiet, the building running on its ordinary Thursday afternoon rhythm, a few residents coming and going, the elevator humming between floors, the distant sound of someone's television. Harold was already at the mailboxes when we passed through sorting envelopes with the methodical patience of a man with nothing particular to do. He didn't look up. Neither did I. Simmons and I took the stairs to the 10th floor. Inside apartment 10B, everything was where Christine Lawson had left it, her furniture, her books, her dishes in the drying rack. The apartment smelled like someone else's life. I stood in the living room of my own home and listened to the building breathe around me and thought about nothing in particular, which was the only way I had learned to manage the waiting. At 1:58, Simmons's earpiece clicked. Kowalski's voice low and even. In the lobby. Subject is here. I heard them before I saw them. Travis's voice in the hallway, confident, unhurried, the same easy manner Kowalski had described from the phone call. He was explaining the HOA rules. He knew them by heart because he had read them in Vera's office on January 14th while Vera was on a coffee run. The key turned in the deadbolt. The door swung open. Travis stepped inside and stopped. The living room was not empty. Detective Simmons stood to his left. I stood to his right. Behind us, two uniformed officers materialized from the hallway. In the doorway, Kowalski stepped back and to the side, clearing the entrance. Travis looked at me. His face did not collapse dramatically. It did what faces do when a careful person realizes their careful plan has just ended it. Went very still, very fast, the way water goes, still, after something heavy drops into it. The leather portfolio was in his right hand. Inside it, I knew, were lease documents bearing my forged signature and the expired notary stamp of Pacific Coast Notary Services. In his left hand was the cashier's check Kowalski had just handed him in the hallway, $5,200 made out to Golden State Rental Solutions, LLC. Travis Holden, Simmons said. You're under arrest for real estate fraud, identity theft, forgery, and elder financial abuse under California Penal Code 368. He looked at the check in his hand, then at me. I had thought about this moment for weeks. I had thought about what I would feel, what I would say, standing there in my own living room in the apartment I had owned for 22 years, looking at the man who had stood at my dinner table and shaken my hand, and planned all of this while I passed him the breadbasket I found I had nothing to say at all. Which was, I decided, exactly right. Simmons reached for her handcuffs. Travis did not resist. He lowered his hands and let the portfolio and the check fall together onto my hardwood floor, and he looked at them lying there for a moment before the cuffs clicked shut. Emily's being picked up now, Simmons said quietly for my benefit. I nodded once. Outside in the hallway, I heard Harold Gibbs clear his throat. The handcuffs on Travis made a sound I had not expected. Not loud. Just a soft mechanical click. Click, the kind of sound that a deadbolt makes when it finally catches after years of sticking. I had heard deadbolts my entire working life. I had installed them, replaced them, diagnosed them. That click was the sound of something being secured, something being closed. I walked out of apartment 10B into the hallway. Harold was standing there with his arms at his sides and his chin up the way he stood when he was working hard, not to show what he was feeling. He looked at me for a moment. Then he put one hand briefly on my shoulder, the same hand he had put on my sleeve the night I came home the first night, when the world had not yet finished tilting. I didn't say anything. Neither did I. We stood in the hallway of the 10th floor of Crestline Towers and listened to the building settle around us, the elevator humming a television somewhere down the hall, the particular sound of an ordinary Thursday afternoon reasserting itself after something extraordinary had just taken place. Then Harold said, "You want coffee?" "Yeah," I said. "I really do." Simmons came out of the apartment 12 minutes later. She had been on her radio coordinating, giving instructions in the clipped shorthand of someone managing multiple moving pieces from a single location. When she stepped into the hallway, she looked at me with the direct, unvarnished attention I had come to recognize as her version of consideration. Emily was picked up at her apartment on Folsom Boulevard at 2:47, she said. No resistance. I had known it was coming. Simmons had told me it was coming. I had known for weeks in the careful, factual part of my brain, where I kept the things I understood, but had not yet felt that this moment would arrive. Knowing did not make the sentence land any softer. Emily Mercer, my daughter, had been arrested at 2:47 on a Thursday afternoon in June. Was she alone? I asked. Travis had already been processed. She was alone. Simmons paused. She asked for a lawyer immediately, which is the right thing to do and also tells you something about her state of mind. It told me she had already known this was a possibility. People who are genuinely shocked ask questions. People who have been running a contingency plan ask for lawyers. Ray arrived at Crestline Towers at 3:30. He had been at the district attorney's office, he said, and the DA's office had been expecting his call. The evidence package, footage, financial records, audio recording, Kowalski's undercover documentation, Ashby's DRE report, Phelps's retracted assessment had been submitted that morning in anticipation of exactly this outcome. He found me in the lobby with Harold, the two of us sitting in the chairs near the entrance that the building kept there for residents waiting for rides. Ray sat down across from us and loosened his tie, which I had never seen him do outside of a courtroom. He looked tired in the way people look tired when something has been finished, rather than when something has gone wrong. The DA is filing tomorrow, he said. 12 counts between the two of them. Real estate fraud, identity theft, forgery, elder financial abuse, unlicensed real estate practice, and conspiracy. He looked at me. The conspiracy charge is the significant one. It establishes that this was coordinated and premeditated. It changes the sentencing range substantially. What does substantially mean? Harold asked. Ray looked at him steadily. Travis is looking at 4 to 6 years if he cooperates. Longer if he doesn't. He paused. Emily, because the conservatorship petition directly targeted a family member and involved fraudulent medical documentation, the DA considers that an aggravating factor. She's looking at 3 to 5, possibly more. I looked at my hands on my knees. 68 years old. The same hands that had taught a small girl to grip bicycle handlebars on a parking lot behind a hardware store on Freeport Boulevard. She'll fight it, I said. Probably, Ray agreed. At least initially. He leaned forward slightly. Daniel, I want to prepare you for something. The next several months are going to be procedural and slow and occasionally painful. Arraignment, preliminary hearing, pre-trial motions. If she takes it to trial, it could be a year before sentencing. He held my gaze. You're going to have to tell this story more than once. To prosecutors, to investigators, possibly to a jury. I know. And the conservatorship petition will need to be formally dismissed. I'll handle that. But it requires a court appearance. I know, I said again. Harold shifted in his chair. He had been quiet since Ray arrived, listening the way he always listened, completely without interruption. What about Christine Lawson? He asked. The woman who was renting the place. She's a named complainant in the civil portion, Ray said. Her deposit $4,800 is included in the restitution order. She'll get it back. He paused. She has also provided a voluntary witness statement confirming the fraudulent nature of the transaction she was a party to. That statement carries weight. I thought about Christine in the lobby of Crestline Towers, holding an envelope in both hands, telling me she had saved 2 years for that deposit. About Gerald the cat in his carrier, conducting his audit of every surface in my apartment for 6 months. Some damage was recoverable. Some wasn't. That was true of most things worth caring about. I stood up from the lobby chair. My left knee ached the way it always ached when I had been sitting too long. Outside the building entrance, Sacramento was doing what Sacramento did in June, baking slowly under a sky that had been the same flat, bright blue since April. The heat settling into the sidewalk and radiating back up in waves that made the far end of the block shimmer slightly. Ray, I said. The apartment. I understood what I was asking. Christine Lawson has agreed to vacate within 30 days. The HOA is prepared to formally restore your ownership documentation this week. He looked up at me. It's yours, Daniel. Legally and formally as of this moment. It never stopped being yours. I had known that too. In the same careful, factual part of my brain, where I kept the things I understood before I felt them. Feeling it was different. Harold stood up beside me. He didn't offer to come with me, which was the right instinct. He just stood there, barrel-chested and steady, a 71-year-old man who had been awake for most of the past 3 months, worrying about his neighbor, and had never once said so out loud. Thank you, Harold, I said. He waved one hand, the dismissive, slightly irritated wave of a man who finds gratitude embarrassing. Go home, Daniel. I took the elevator. The doors opened on the 10th floor, and the hallway was empty and quiet. My welcome mat was still. The brass numbers on the door. 10B caught the late afternoon light the same way they always had. I stood in front of my door for a long moment. Then I reached into my pocket for the key. The navy blue suit still fit. I had not worn it since Emily's college graduation 11 years ago. I had stood in the parking lot of the Sacramento Convention Center in that suit with a bouquet of flowers I had bought from a gas station, because every florist within 5 miles had been sold out, and Emily had laughed when she saw them and said they were perfect. I had kept the suit because it was a good suit, and because I was the kind of man who kept things that still had use in them. I put it on at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in October and drove to the Sacramento Superior Court on I Street. Courtroom 7 was not crowded, but it was full in the way that mattered. Harold sat 2 rows behind me wearing a collared shirt I had never seen before, which told me Sandra had been involved in his getting dressed that morning. Vera Osgood was there, upright and attentive in the 3rd row. Christine Lawson sat at the end of the 4th row. She had contacted Ray's office 2 weeks earlier, asking if she could attend, and Ray had said of course. She was wearing the same gray coat she had worn the day she handed me back my key, and she held her handbag in both hands on her lap, with the particular stillness of someone who has decided to witness something through to its conclusion. Travis had already entered his plea. 3 weeks earlier in a proceeding I had not attended because Ray had advised me it would be procedural and brief and correct on both counts. Travis Holden had pleaded guilty to 6 counts: real estate fraud, identity theft, forgery, elder financial abuse, unlicensed real estate practice, and conspiracy. His cooperation with the district attorney's office, which had included a full account of every transaction, and Emily's role in each one had been noted in the plea agreement. Sentencing was deferred to this morning. Emily sat at the defense table in a dark blazer, her hands folded in front of her, her posture exactly as it had been at Cornerstone Coffee 4 months earlier. Controlled, deliberate, already deciding how the next conversation would go. Her attorney had filed a motion to suppress the audio recording. Judge Patricia Holloway had denied it in 11 pages of written ruling that Ray had described as thorough and unambiguous. The recording was in evidence. The recording was going to be played. The prosecutor stood and addressed the court. She was methodical and precise, walking Judge Holloway through the evidence in the order it had been assembled: the Sentinel Shield footage, the Golden State Rental Solutions financial records, the Pacific Coast Notary Services connection, the fraudulent conservatorship petition, and finally, the audio recording obtained at Cornerstone Coffee on R Street on a Thursday morning in May. Emily's voice filled the courtroom. "Yao built it. I collected it. That's how inheritance works, Dad." The timing was just different. The room did not react dramatically. No gasps, no murmuring. People who have come to a courtroom to witness something have usually already decided how they feel about it. What happened instead was a particular quality of stillness, the stillness of people who are listening to something they will not forget. I looked at the table in front of me. The wood grain ran in long, parallel lines from left to right. I counted them. Emily's attorney rose and delivered his argument with the competence of a man working with inadequate materials. He challenged the chain of custody on the Sentinel Shield footage. He argued the audio recording lacked sufficient context. He suggested the conservatorship petition reflected genuine filial concern rather than calculated fraud. Judge Holloway listened without expression and wrote on her notepad and did not appear persuaded. Then the prosecutor played the recording a second time. "You should have stayed in Fresno. Everyone would have been better off." Emily looked at the defense table. Her jaw was set. Her hands were still folded. For 4 months, she had maintained the posture of someone who had not yet accepted that the ground beneath her had shifted permanently. I had watched that posture from across a coffee shop table. I recognized it now for what it was: not confidence. The last architecture of a position that had already collapsed. Her attorney leaned close and spoke quietly. Emily listened. Then she looked up and across the court, and for the first time since the proceedings had begun, she looked directly at me. I held her gaze. I did not look away, and I did not look toward her. I simply looked the way you look at something you are trying to understand and have mostly given up understanding. She turned back to her attorney and said something I could not hear. He nodded. He rose and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the defense wishes to amend its plea." Judge Holloway set her pen down. "To what? Guilty, Your Honor, on all counts." The stillness in the room changed quality. It became the stillness of something that has just been settled rather than the stillness of something being decided. Judge Holloway looked at Emily directly. "Ms. Mercer, do you understand that by entering this plea you are waiving your right to trial and accepting the consequences of a guilty finding on all 11 counts as charged?" Emily's voice, when it came, was steady. Yes, Your Honor. And you are entering this plea voluntarily, without coercion. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Holloway looked at the courtroom at Vera Osgood and Christine Lawson and Harold Gibbs and the others who had come because something had happened in this building, and they had wanted to see it returned to the record. Then she looked at me. She did not speak to me. She simply looked for perhaps 2 seconds with the particular attention of a person who understands the difference between a case number and a human life. Then she turned back to Emily. Travis received 4 years in state prison credit for cooperation, with mandatory restitution to Daniel Mercer and Christine Lawson, covering all documented financial losses. When the deputies came for him, he stood without being told and walked out with his eyes forward. Emily received 3 years and 8 months, no cooperation, credit, mandatory restitution, 5 years, probation upon release. When the judge read the sentence, Emily's hands unfolded from the table for the first time all morning. She pressed them flat against her thighs, the same gesture I had used in hospital rooms and hotel rooms and police stations for the past 6 months, to keep myself from shaking. She had learned it somewhere. I tried not to think about where. The deputies came for her. She stood. She turned toward the door. And for a moment, just a moment, the length of 2 steps, she turned her head and looked back across the courtroom. I was already standing, reaching for my jacket from the back of my chair. I did not look up. Behind me, I heard Harold Gibbs exhale slowly through his nose, the long, controlled exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for 6 months and had finally carefully let it go. Christine Lawson called me on a Monday morning in early November. I was at the Residence Inn still. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Ray had confirmed the HOA paperwork the week after sentencing, and apartment 10B was legally and formally mine, again in every way that mattered. I had stayed at the hotel because going back felt like something that needed to be done correctly, and I had not yet determined what correctly meant. Some things require more preparation than you anticipate. Some doors are harder to walk through the second time than the first. Mr. Mercer, Christine said. Her voice was careful in the way voices are careful when the person speaking has been rehearsing. I'm finished. Everything is out. I'd like to bring you the key. You don't have to do that, I said. You can leave it with Vera. A pause. I'd like to do it in person if that's all right. I thought about it for a moment. All right, I said. I'll be there at 2. She was waiting in the lobby when I arrived. Gerald the tabby cat was in a carrier at her feet, guarding me through the mesh door with the same deep suspicion he had maintained since the first evening we met. Christine was dressed neatly, a gray coat, her hair pulled back. She held a small envelope in both hands. She looked at me the way people look at someone they have wronged without meaning to, with the particular combination of guilt and relief that comes from knowing the wronged party understands the distinction. Mr. Mercer. She held out the envelope. The key. And she reached into her coat pocket and produced a small card. My insurance company's contact information. For anything that needs to be repaired or replaced. I went through everything before I packed. I don't believe anything was damaged, but if there is anything, I want to cover it. I took the envelope and the card. The envelope was light, just a single key, the one Travis had cut for the new deadbolt. The key that had replaced mine. Christine, I said. I owe you an apology. She blinked. I'm sorry. You lost your deposit. You had to find somewhere else to live on 30 days' notice. You spent 6 months as a witness in a criminal investigation. I looked at her directly. None of that was your fault, and all of it happened because someone used your good faith as a tool. Her chin trembled slightly, just slightly, the involuntary movement of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for a long time. and has just been given permission to set it down. I should have looked more carefully, she said. You looked at everything a reasonable person looks at, I said. The documents were professionally made. The building information was accurate. The person showing you the apartment knew every detail. I paused. You were careful. You were just up against someone who was more practiced at deception than you were at detecting it. She was quiet for a moment. Gerald the cat made a sound of profound existential complaint from inside his carrier. Christine laughed a short, surprised laugh, the kind that breaks through when you are not expecting it. I found myself smiling, which I had not done in longer than I could calculate. He's been like that since we left, she said, looking down at the carrier. He doesn't like transitions. Sensible animal, I said. She picked up the carrier. Then she looked at me one more time, the long, direct look of someone making a final accounting. Mr. Mercer, I'm glad it worked out. What you did going after them the way you did not giving up, I don't know if I would have had that in me. You would have, I said. People usually do when it's their home. She nodded once, shifted the carrier to her other hand, and walked to the elevator without looking back, which I understood and respected. I stood in the lobby alone for a moment. Vera Osgood was behind the front desk, pointedly reviewing a document and giving me the privacy of her professional attention being elsewhere. Harold was not in the lobby, he had told me that morning. He would make himself scarce, and Harold Gibbs was a man who did what he said he would do. I took the elevator to the 10th floor. The hallway was quiet. My welcome mat was still there, navy blue, frayed at the corner where I had caught it with the hand truck 2 summers ago. The brass numbers on the door caught the afternoon light the way they always had, the way they had been catching it since I hung them myself, with a level and a pencil mark on a Saturday morning in 2003. I opened the envelope and took out the key Travis had cut. Then I put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in my jacket pocket. I reached into my other pocket. The original key, the one that had stopped fitting the night I came home, the one I had carried for 9 years. I had kept it through 3 weeks at the Budget Inn and 2 weeks at the Residence Inn. I had kept it the way you keep things you are not ready to examine, in the bottom of a jacket pocket, present but unaddressed. I held it up in the hallway light. The new deadbolt would not accept it. I already knew that. Travis had replaced the deadbolt on his first visit January 7th, the clip that Sentinel Shield had archived, and Linda Cartwright had retrieved, and Ray had subpoenaed, and Simmons had entered into evidence. That lock was gone. The key that fit it was in an evidence locker somewhere downtown, but there were 2 locks on this door. There had always been 2 locks on this door. A deadbolt bolt and below it, the passage lock built into the handle. The original lock installed when the building was constructed, serviced twice in 22 years by a plumber and electrician who knew every mechanical system in the place intimately and had never once thought to replace what was not broken. I looked at the passage lock. Then I looked at the key in my hand. I reached out and fitted the key into the lower lock. The tumblers moved, all of them exactly as they always had. I turned the key. The passage lock opened. I stood in the hallway of the 10th floor of Crestline Towers, with my original key in the lock of my original apartment, and felt something pass through me that I did not have a precise word for. Not triumph, triumph was too loud for what this was. Not relief, relief implied the danger was over, and some part of me understood that the particular danger of loving someone who could do what Emily had done would not be over for a very long time. Something quieter than either of those things. I pushed the door open. The apartment smelled like Christine's life, her soap, her coffee, a faint trace of Gerald the cat, who had spent 6 months conducting a territorial audit of every surface. It was not my smell yet. That would take time. Smells take time. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with the same familiar click I had heard thousands of times before. The afternoon light came through the west window and laid a long orange stripe across the living room floor, exactly as it always had, exactly as I had been thinking about since January, when I was lying in a hospital bed in Fresno, trying to remember what home felt like. I stood in the middle of my living room and let it. I did not call anyone that first night. Harold had offered to help the following morning, had made the offer twice in the careful way he made offers he expected to be declined, leaving space for me to say no without it becoming a conversation. I had said no the first time, and he had nodded and said the offer stood. That was Harold. The offer always stood. I needed to do this alone. The first thing I did was open every window in the apartment. Not because it was warm, Sacramento in November ran cool in the evenings, and by 7 o'clock I could feel the air coming off the river through the west window. I opened them because the apartment needed to breathe out 6 months of someone else's life before it could start breathing in mine again. I stood in the living room and listened to the city come through the screen's traffic, a dog somewhere below the distant percussion of a basketball being dribbled on the court behind the building, and I let the familiar sounds of my neighborhood settle back into the walls where they belonged. Then I started. I did not rush. Rushing would have been wrong, would have been treating the work like a task to be completed, rather than something that required presence. I was a man who had spent 40 years doing work that required presence. You could not be somewhere else in your mind when you were diagnosing a failed pressure valve or tracing a short in a wall you could not open. The work demanded that you be exactly where you were. This demanded the same. Christine had been considerate. The apartment was clean, the surfaces wiped, the dishes in the cabinet returned to something close to where I kept them. She had not known exactly where I kept things, nobody could have known that, but she had tried, which was more than I had expected, and more than she was obligated to give. I started with the bookshelves. My books had been moved to make room for hers, stacked horizontally on the lower shelves rather than standing upright the way I kept them. I took each one out and stood it correctly. 40 years of paperbacks and technical manuals and the occasional novel I had bought in an airport and never finished. I found 3 of Christine's books mixed in with mine. I set them on the kitchen counter to give to Vera for the building's common room. I moved to the kitchen, reorganized the cabinet above the refrigerator, which Christine had used for things I kept somewhere else, and somewhere else for things I kept there. Moved the coffee maker back to the left of the sink, where it had sat since 2011. Found the specific drawer where I kept batteries and takeout menus, and the small flashlight I used during power outages, which had become a general-purpose drawer for Christine and required 15 minutes to restore. Small things. Ordinary things. The particular geography of a life which looks like nothing from the outside and is everything from the inside. By 9 o'clock, I had reached the hallway. Margaret's photograph was in the duffel bag I had brought from the residence inn. I had carried it through 3 months in the hospital in Fresno and 5 months in 2 different hotels, wrapped in a flannel shirt, because I was not a man who left photographs of his wife in empty apartments. I unwrapped it, set it on the hallway table, stepped back. Margaret Mercer had been 53 years old when the photograph was taken, sitting on the back steps of the house we had owned on 48th Street before we sold it and moved to Crestline Towers. She was laughing at something off camera. I knew what I had been the one who said it. A joke about the neighbor's dog and a sprinkler system that would not have been funny to anyone else. Her laugh was the kind that took over her whole face, and she had never been self-conscious about it, which was one of the things I had loved most. She had been gone for 8 years. The apartment had been mine alone for 8 years. Emily had grown up coming to this building, had sat at this table and eaten meals I cooked, and complained about the couch being too firm and fallen asleep on it. Anyway, had known where I kept the spare keys, had known the HOA bylaws, had known the security vendor and the management office hours and the neighbors' names, had known all of it, and had used all of it. I stood in the hallway for a while, with Margaret looking at something off camera and laughing at a joke only I remembered. Then I went to the desk. The desk was in the second bedroom, the room I used as an office where I kept the files and tools and spare parts that accumulate over a life spent fixing things for a living. Christine had used it as a bedroom, and she had cleared it back to something close to its original configuration before she left. The files were stacked rather than filed. The tools were grouped rather than organized. Close enough. I would sort it properly over the coming weeks. I opened the center drawer to check the contents. Pens, rubber bands, a spare set of reading glasses I had forgotten I owned. A water bill from October 2024. A birthday card from Harold and Sandra with a cartoon on the front that I had kept because it made me laugh every time I saw it. I opened the top left drawer. Christine's things, a phone charger, 2 hair ties, a small bottle of hand lotion, a notepad with grocery lists in her handwriting. I set them aside for the building's lost and found. I opened the bottom left drawer. It was deeper than the others. The kind of drawer that accumulated the things you were not ready to deal with, old manuals, expired warranties, a tape measure I had been looking for since 2019. I pulled it open and felt around at the back where things slid when they were forgotten. My fingers found an envelope. I knew what it was before I pulled it out. The size, the weight, the particular texture of the paper Margaret had always used for correspondence. Heavier than standard cream-colored, the kind she ordered from a stationery shop on K Street that had closed years ago. She had written on this paper for as long as I had known her. The envelope had Emily's name on the front in Margaret's handwriting. It had been opened. I sat down at the desk with the envelope in both hands and looked at it for a long time. I did not open it. I already knew what was inside. Margaret had told me she was writing. It had told me what she intended to say in the last weeks when she was still well enough to write and had decided to spend that energy on the things that mattered most. A letter to Emily. Instructions, encouragement. The particular wisdom of a woman who had known she was leaving and had wanted to make sure certain things were said. Take care of your father. Those were the words Margaret had told me she was going to use. Not as a burden, she had said, as a privilege. Emily had read those words. I set the envelope back in the drawer, closed it, pressed both palms flat on the desk surface, and looked at the wall in front of me, the same wall I had looked at for 22 years, bare, except for the small rectangular shadow where a calendar had hung before Christine rearranged things. There was nothing left to understand about what Emily had done or why. All the understanding I was going to arrive at I had already arrived at. What remained was simply the fact of it, which I would carry, the way you carry things that cannot be put down, present always adjusted to over time, never gone. I stood up, turned off the desk lamp, walked back to the hallway. Margaret was still laughing at something off camera. I said goodnight to her photograph, the way I had said goodnight to it every evening for 8 years, which was not out loud and did not require an audience. And then I went to bed in my own apartment for the first time in 10 months. The first week back felt like wearing a coat you had not worn in a long time. Familiar in the general shape of it. Unfamiliar in the specific, the weight of it on your shoulders, slightly different than you remembered. The pockets, not quite where your hands expected them to be. You put it on anyway, because it is your coat, and you know it will fit again once you have worn it long enough. I made coffee every morning at the same time, sat in the recliner with the cup balanced on the arm, the way I always had, the way I had done for 11 years, in this particular chair, in this particular corner of the room. I read the newspaper. I watched the light change in the west window, through the morning pale gray, at 6 gold, by 8, white, and flat by 10. I had watched this progression for 22 years, and it had never been exactly the same twice, which was something I had noticed once, and then forgotten, and was now noticing again. Small things. The resumption of small things. Harold knocked on my door on the third morning. I was carrying 2 cups from the coffee shop on the ground floor of the building, the kind with the cardboard sleeves that never quite fit right. And he looked at me with the expression of a man who has decided that 3 days of leaving someone alone is sufficient, and that further solitude would now constitute neglect. "Coffee," he said. "I have coffee," I said. "Better coffee." He held up both cups. Sandra made me come. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table the way we had sat at kitchen tables for 12 years, him on the left, me on the right, an arrangement that had established itself without discussion and remained because neither of us had reason to change it. He asked how I was sleeping. I told him adequately. He told me Sandra had left a casserole in the hallway the previous evening because she had not wanted to interrupt, and I confirmed that I had found it and eaten most of it, and it was very good. He nodded. That was the entirety of the welfare check, which was exactly the right length. Before he left, he stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at Margaret's photograph on the table. He had known Margaret for 11 years. He had been at her funeral. He had brought food to this apartment for 3 weeks afterward without being asked, and had never mentioned it again. "She would have liked how this turned out," he said. I thought about that. "I think she would have been furious," I said, "at Emily, for a long time." Harold considered it. "Yeah," he said, "probably, but she would have liked that you didn't give up." He left. I stood in the hallway with Margaret's photograph for a moment. Then I went back to the desk. I had been avoiding the desk. Not consciously, I had been to the desk several times in the past 3 days to file the HOA paperwork Ray had sent over, to write a thank you note to Linda Cartwright at Sentinel Shield, to look up the phone number for the restitution coordinator at the DA's office, who had called twice about Christine Lawson's deposit reimbursement. Practical things. Things that required the desk without requiring me to open the bottom left drawer. On the 4th morning, I opened it. The envelope was where I had left it. Cream-colored paper, Margaret's handwriting on the front, Emily's name. The flap had been opened and resealed imperfectly. Whoever had opened it had not bothered to make the resealing look careful, which told me something about the state of mind of the person who had read it. Or perhaps it told me they had not thought the seal would matter, that no one would ever be back to notice. I did not read the letter. It was not my letter to read. Margaret had written it for Emily, and whatever it contained was between a mother and a daughter, and I had no desire to know the words Emily had read before deciding to do what she did. Knowing the words would not change what she had done with them. Knowing the words would only give me something else to carry. I put the envelope back in the drawer. Then I sat at the desk for a while doing nothing, in particular, which is different from doing nothing. Doing nothing is absence. Doing nothing in particular is presence without agenda, the specific kind of presence that comes after something large has finished and you are not yet sure what comes next. What came next was December. Sacramento in December was not the December of other places. Snow, no ice temperatures that required a jacket, but not an argument about it. The light changed, though. It came lower and slower through the west window, the orange stripe on the floor wider and more diffused, lasting longer into the afternoon before it faded. I noticed this. I had time to notice things again, which felt like recovering a sense I had not realized I had lost. Ray called on the 1st of December with a procedural update. The restitution payment schedule had been finalized and filed with the court. Christine Lawson's deposit had been returned in full, and the conservatorship petition had been formally dismissed by Sacramento Superior Court, with prejudice meaning it could not be refiled. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I did not. He said he would check in again after the new year. I hung up and sat in the recliner and looked at the west window. I had been thinking about the key. Not the new key, Travis's key, the one Christine had returned in the cream envelope, the one that fit the deadbolt Travis had installed on January 7th. I had put that key in the kitchen drawer with the batteries and takeout menus and the flashlight, because it was a functional key, and I am not a man who discards functional things. I would use it until I replaced the deadbolt, which I intended to do in the spring, when I had the time and inclination to stand in the hallway with my tools and do the work properly. The old key was on the kitchen counter. I had put it there the evening I came back after the passage lock, after stepping inside, after standing in the living room, and letting the afternoon light do what it had always done. I had set the key on the counter the way you set something down when you are not sure yet whether you are done with it. I picked it up now. It was unremarkable. A standard house key brass, worn at the edges from 9 years of use, with a small nick in the bow where it had caught on a zipper once. It did not look like evidence of anything. It did not look like the key to 22 years. I walked to the front door. The new deadbolt was above. Travis's deadbolt, the one that had stopped me in the hallway on a Tuesday afternoon in April, when I had come home from 90 days in Fresno and found my life had been rearranged without my consent. I would replace it in the spring. Until then, it would function as what it was, a lock on a door, nothing more. Below it, the passage lock, original, installed when the building was constructed, serviced twice by the man currently holding the key that fit it. I fitted the old key into the passage lock. The tumblers moved. All of them, as they always had, with the specific smoothness of a mechanism that had been properly maintained and had never been asked to do more than it was built for. I did not turn it. I did not need to open the door. I was already inside. I stood there for a moment, with the key in the lock, and my hand on the bow of it, and the building quiet around me, the elevator humming somewhere below, the faint sound of Harold's television through the wall, Sacramento going about its December afternoon, with the complete indifference of a city that does not pause for individual reckoning. 68 years old. 40 years fixing things for a living. 1 daughter. 1 home. I thought about what Harold had said. She would have liked that you didn't give up. I thought about Margaret sitting on the back steps of the house on 48th Street, laughing at something only I remembered. I thought about the birthday card in the desk drawer with the cartoon that still made me smile. I thought about Christine Lawson's tabby cat, conducting his territorial audit of every surface. I did not think about Emily. There would be time for that, years of it, most likely the slow and non-linear work of understanding how a person you loved became a person who could do what she had done. I was not ready for that work yet. I was ready only for this, the key in the lock, the building breathing around me, the orange stripe of December light reaching across the living room floor. I withdrew the key, held it for a moment. Then I walked to the kitchen counter and set it down next to its replacement, the old key and the new key side by side, neither one more mine than the other, both of them doing what keys do. I went back to the recliner, picked up the book from the side table, the paperback from the hospital gift shop, the one I had been unable to read during 5 months of hotels. Page 47. the same page I had been on since January. I read to the bottom of the page. Then I turned it. I am 68 years old. I spent 90 days in a hospital, 5 months in hotel rooms, and one very long night sitting at a desk, holding an envelope I chose not to open. And I got my home back. But I want to be honest with you, because that is the only thing I know how to be. Getting the apartment back was not the hard part. The hard part is waking up every morning in a place that still holds the shape of someone who chose to erase you. I believe God does not give us more than we can carry, but some mornings the weight takes time to find its place. If there is one thing I would tell you, do not wait until something is taken to understand what it means to you. Protect what you have built. Write the will. Update the documents. Tell the people you trust that you trust them out loud in writing, in ways that cannot be undone by someone with a leather portfolio and 18 minutes alone in the wrong office. Don't do what I did. Don't assume love is enough to make a person honest. These are grandpa stories nobody plans to live, but some of us do. And the ones who make it through are the ones who refuse to stop being who they are. If this family story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted for reflection and understanding. If that is not for you, no hard feelings, find what feeds your soul elsewhere.